Let's go ahead and jump right into our first session then. Our first session today is going to be on technology. As with most industries, technology is reshaping our industry, our companies. As I said earlier, we do have challenges in our businesses, and technology is a big part of the solution to those challenges. If we adopt it and work together in the adoption of it, there are big strides to be made here, both really across the board. Recovery results, operating efficiencies, compliance, risk management, all of that. But because of the way the data flows and the various systems that govern this industry and that are used in this industry, working together to harness it is absolutely critical. We've got a really good panel here to lead the discussion today. We've got the heads of really the two leading platform providers in the marketplace and head of systems development for a major agency. Let's start down on the end here. We've got Cort DeHart. Cort is the president, CEO of MBSi, who many of you know is the provider of the iRepo and Recovery Connect platform. Cort is he's been an innovator in this industry and an early driver of technology for many years. Prior to coming to MBSi, Cort was one of the founders of the DRN LPR network. And as most of you know, LPR has had an enormous impact on our business in recent years. I've got Justin Zane here. Justin is the president and CEO of RDN, which is the other major platform. Again, Justin's been instrumental in driving technology developments in the industry, founded one of the most successful repo agencies in the country, but probably even more pertinent to this discussion is that Justin and a couple of other partners were the founders and the developers of the ClearPlan platform, which hundreds, if not more than 1,000 agencies have adopted to help drive innovation and efficiencies and better results in their operations. And then in the middle, we've got Andy Sinclair. Andy is head of systems development at International Recovery Services, which is a leading repossession agency that operates throughout Pennsylvania. IRS is widely known in agent circles and forwarder circles as an early adopter and an aggressive user of technology to drive their business. In fact, many of us use IRS when we're developing new capabilities, new integrations. We turn to Andy and his team to help us beta test and refine those. So that's our panel today. This is going to be a straight-up panel discussion. I personally had advocated for a wrestling match between Cort and Justin, with Andy refereeing. So you notice I've got him in the middle here. I just thought that might be more entertaining and maybe would help you decide which of their platforms you prefer to work with.
He's a lot younger than I am.
Couldn't get him to go for it, so we'll just stick with the panel instead. All right, so I'll start by throwing out a question to really all three of you. What do each of you think is the single most significant development in technology in our industry over the past couple of years? And Justin, maybe you and Cort can speak to the issue from the lender and forwarder perspective, platform provider perspective, and then maybe Andy, you chime in from an agency perspective.
Sure. Want me to start?
Sure.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I guess to answer that question, I'd also look at the history of the technology in this space. It's been pretty limited as far as real advancement. We've got 1998, 97-ish. You've got MBSi and RDN kind of come out with their platforms, and that was significant at that time. 10 years later, you've got DRN and MVTrack and kind of the inception of LPR technology. And then about another 8 years later, probably the next biggest development, which is obviously self-serving, but the next biggest development was probably the mapping solution and efficiency tools at the agent level that allow us to connect in real time with the agent network. So although it's like as I said, it's a little bit self-serving, I would say that the mapping technology has been the greatest most recent advancement that we've seen.
What do you think, Cort?
You know, we talked about this as a group a little bit about the industry, and when you look at in our industry and other industries, you kind of look at where is that industry in the evolution of technology? How are they adopting it? And you know, at one end of the world, you have the CIA, Amazon, Wall Street hedge funds who are using everything possible out there to get a slight edge. And if you were to kind of compare that to the high school evolutionary, you know, man chart where the guy, you know, starts walking, stand up, using tools, you know, our industry probably is still in the hand tool, you know, phase. We've got so much opportunity to do things going forward. And when I think about the significant developments in technology, they're really outside of our industry. Multi-tier software design, instead of one big software, breaking it up into components. APIs, web services, the languages, the softwares that are used. Those are the things that are used in the rest of the world that our industry is just now starting to use. And I think that's will ultimately empower everything downstream. So as you said, you know, most of the systems out there are 20 years old, including you know, the iRepo system. That's why we've started migrating to a new platform, and Justin's, you know, with ClearPlan and RDN's coming together. And so at the end of the day, I think it's the technologies outside of our industry that are probably going to have the most impact.
You know, from a forwarder perspective, there's been lots of developments, but the connectivity with the major platforms out there, the APIs that you referenced, that's been a bit of a game changer for us. Just the ability for the data to flow pretty seamlessly from our client to us to the agency, and now with mobile platforms actually to the agent in the field. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about mobile platforms shortly. But Andy, what's your view on it?
So the biggest thing for us was going to be ClearPlan, right? So what happened was, before ClearPlan and the mapping software products that were out there, we had run sheets or we had papers. So if we received your order, we'd receive your order on a piece of paper, we'd print it out, and you gave us 5 addresses, right? Because you guys are the best skip tracers, right? So the guy in the truck would have to go and say, okay, well, I got to map out where I'm going to go. All right, yeah, I know where that is. I know where that is. And he's going to go and run it, and then he's going to put that piece of paper away. What ClearPlan did was it fed all those addresses into like a Google Map program with all these little pinpoints, and then the guys can pull up their map, see where they are, and then see where all their pinpoints are. So that way they became a lot more efficient. So that was one of the biggest things. And then the second piece.
Elaborate on that a little bit more.
Sure.
In terms of the significance of that kind of you know, smart mapping and what it does for recovery rates.
Yeah, so that's about efficiency, right? So it depends on how the agent runs. You can either have an agent that does everything in the truck. They have cameras on the truck. The tow truck driver themselves are going out and spotting. They're running addresses, but they're also wasting money on all that fuel and all that wear and tear on a tow truck, as opposed to maybe a smaller car. So what we do is we have spotter cars that go out and use the mapping software, and all they do is they go out, they find cars, they say, hey, tow truck driver, it's here at 123 Main Street, let's go pick it up. And that's the only thing that the tow truck driver's doing, is going out, picking up the cars that we find and bringing them back. Right, so we're able to have Honda Civics, you know, Ford Focuses out there just mapping, and they're in their own little zone, and they're able to figure out, okay, where do I need to go? And they're out there just running addresses.
But you can also put in business rules that more intelligently route those addresses, right? Not just on proximity, but you know, other data points that you might have that suggest you might run at different times of day, or something like that.
We have the ability to identify addresses that we want run during certain time periods, or we can flag it if we have some type of skip information on it. We're able to flag an address and say, hey, this needs this type of attention. But they're able to see that just instantaneously looking at their map.
You know, this whole this mapping capability is obviously driven by mobile platform technology, but the mapping is really just a piece of of the promise that mobile platforms bring to our industry. I'd like to hear your perspectives on the bigger picture, because mapping is certainly one advantage that mobile technology offers, but it's just one of several. So where do you see mobile having the biggest impact? Again, from from platform provider perspective, forwarder/lender perspective, and agency perspective.
So I guess I'm going to keep going back to the beginning a few times here, but if you think about the transaction that occurs, if we're speaking just on the act of the repossession, and you look at the processes that were in place before, and if you're using the example like Andy gave of 5 addresses, or even if you skim it down to 2 addresses, the transaction is you're sending an account out with 2 addresses, and depending on what your SLAs require, depending on what your processes or mandates are, those agencies are going out and they're updating those accounts with their status. The problem is, and one of the things that we saw a little bit earlier this year, is the frequency of updates, right? So we've got this frequency of updates. It's right now, it's around 410,000 mobile updates every single day, just through the platforms that we control, 410,000 updates daily. But if you look at the updates coming from an RDN or an MBSi, independent of the mobile updates, you're closer to about 500,000 updates daily. So if you think about that visually, and you think about these agencies or they're sending them to the forwarders, or they're sending it to your companies direct, you visualize a truck backing up to your door every day with 410,000 updates and dumping it on your lap and then driving away, and tomorrow they'll be back there. The advantages are really in the consumption, because the activity on the agent side, most agents they're contingent now, right? They're not going to get paid unless they secure the collateral. For some of you, there's still a closed fee, but that's it's kind of few and far between. So the actions don't stop, right? These agencies are still going to run all these accounts repetitively to try to secure your collateral, but their updates that they're sending back to you, you can't consume them, right? So the first advantage that mobiles, and I'll go into that in detail. I know some of the other questions, so I'll go into that into more detail. But the first thing that it solves is actually connecting you with the field, right? So the difference was when it was just RDN, when it was just an RDN or just an MBSi assignment, a lot of times you weren't getting your updates for 1, 3, 5, maybe even 7 days. And a lot of times they might have been manufactured updates from the office. So now this is kind of like your first insight into the difference between an office update and an actual field attempt. And the way that I think you guys are looking at your data is going to change. Long answer, sorry.
Who here is familiar with the geotagging technology that is inherent in some of these platforms? Because that's really what Justin's referring to, the ability to for an agent to essentially prove that they were at an address by simply hitting a button when they're there. It geostamps it, and that actually becomes the update, along with some other disposition codes that might be included. Anybody using that at all or requiring that at all? You'll see a lot of that going forward, and that's one of the promises of these platforms, is the ability to get a real update, a true update. Now and we'll talk. I'll hold this comment until later to talk a little bit more about geotagging and what we have to do to work together to make it actually useful and functional. Why don't you add a perspective?
Yeah, Mike, I would say on the mobile side, a few years ago when we were rolling out RC around the same time you guys were rolling out ClearPlan, I mean, the industry wasn't ready for mobile. And part of the reason, I think, is that mobile adds a level of transparency and accountability to an industry that traditionally had, I want to say thrived, but the margins there. There was things that you could do, and everybody kind of knew what the game was, so to speak. And I think when mobile came out, it added a level of transparency that initially people feared. I think they've come to appreciate some of the benefits that come with transparency. And I would say the other thing is, at least in our case with the Recovery Connect, was the ability to connect in real time to the lender at the moment of recovery. So wrongful or unintended repossessions have been a big problem for years. But once we were able to connect the driver to the lender's database in real time, no matter what system they were in, we dropped wrongfuls by 95, 98%. And almost to the point to where we're talking about hundreds. Now we're arguing over whether we have 1 or 2 and what's going on there. So I would say the updates is a story we can go on forever. I think we could have a whole session just on that.
We did last year.
Yeah, exactly. And Just as Justin said, when I first joined MBSi, I looked at 28 million updates. It was like, what are we doing here? And we looked, and recovery rates were the same across the board, no matter how many updates you did. And they're a remnant from an old bygone era of close fees, and they were put in, and just one of those habits that has hardened. But I would say it's not just not useful, I would say it's counterproductive now, so.
Your perspective, Andy?
So mobile technology for us it's a big help because, as I mentioned earlier, we have the spotters and we have drivers, and they're not supposed to communicate to each other, but it happens. So when a spotter finds the car, they send it in to dispatch and they say, hey, I got my Ford Focus on 123 Main Street. We send the driver out. Now, what the driver needs to do is mark the car on hook, right? So before mobile technology or before there's as many integrations that there are today, he would go out and say, oh, who's the client? Who's the lien holder? Okay, I got to go into this system of record, and then I have to mark it here, and then I got to do this, and then I have to, okay, all right, yeah, I'm good on this one. But now you have RC on hook, and an RDN's getting there, and ClearPlan's getting there with their on hook feature. So when he's there, when our driver's at the actual car, he's marking on hook, and everybody knows, and everything's recovered where it needs to be recovered, whether it's an RDN, whether it's an iRepo, wherever it needs to be. So it's making the relationship and the communication a lot easier between the agents and through you guys.
Mike, one other thing on the mobile, I think it's an opportunity for standardization, and I know y'all have some panel discussions on that later, but one of the challenges that we had with a lot of our clients, and I think everybody has, is the condition reports. There are hundreds of, I think we had 50 to 60 different condition reports in the system, and essentially with the mobile platform to do the condition report, we've gone to one, where everybody in all of our clients are using essentially one condition report that generates from the mobile. So I think that's where a lot of opportunity to standardize is in the mobile and obviously the desktop platforms.
Just to elaborate on the compliance benefits that mobile brings, the way the industry is structured today with lenders, management companies, agencies, and agents, before mobile technology, when a lender closed an account, put an account on hold, got transferred to the forwarder had to turn around and get it to the agent or the agency. And then the agency had to turn around and get it to their driver in the field. And the breakdowns in that communication is what drives the majority of the repossessions and error that are made, the vast majority of them, outside of lien losses and stuff that happens on the lender side. So with these mobile platforms, it's now seamless and almost real time. So as soon as a lender closes or puts an account on hold, it's getting down to that truck level almost instantaneously. And if they're following proper procedure, and each of these platforms works a little differently in terms of how it handles it, but if procedure's being followed, they know about that hold or that close before they hook a car. So that's one big benefit. And then the other side of the coin, I think Cort alluded to this, was that, or maybe Justin, another compliance problem is car gets hooked. Customer looks out their window, sees their car being driven down the street, towed down the street, immediately calls in and makes payment. At that point, without this technology and without this seamless flow of data, lender doesn't really know. Lender takes a payment on a car that was just recovered, and that's a problem. So mobile really takes all of that out. Big deal. Does any lenders here, have any lenders here taken the position that they don't want any agents utilized on their business if the agency isn't using one of these mobile platforms? Nobody? Because there are some lenders that have. And we as a company, ALS Resolvion, has adopted, back in June, we adopted a mobile-only policy. We frankly had to weed out several of our agents because they didn't support the technology that we felt was so important. But I think you're going to see more and more lenders going to that position and taking that position that, if I'm going to work with you, forwarder or agent directly, you've got to be able to communicate. I've got to be able to communicate down to your agent in real time. I see that as being one of the biggest trends and changes in the industry over the next year or two. We're already starting to see it and feel it. Just going back to geotagging and this whole issue of updates. So the technology exists, but what do what do the rest of us need to do in order to really utilize it, for the agents to want to use it, for the lenders and the forwarders to be comfortable with it? What changes have to take place?
It starts with stuff like this, conversations, because I think ultimately we just have to be honest about it. Either an update has value or it doesn't. If it has value, someone ought to pay for it. And if it doesn't have value, we shouldn't do it. It's not affecting recovery rates one way or the other, at least over the 4 or 5 million repos that we've looked at in comparison to the number of updates or frequency of updates. It doesn't move the needle. That being said, the more often you run an address, the more likely you are to find a car. So there is a correlation. But since most people pay on a contingency fee, the real correlation is recovery rates. If you don't run the addresses, your recovery rate is going to be bad. So I think it's an honest conversation. It probably also starts in the legal and compliance side because the contracts that are in place have it already in there. And some of the contracts, we looked at this, I gave the keynote on this very issue at RE3 3 years ago, and pulled up 2 contracts 10 years apart. All the updates were still required in both, but the only difference was there was no close fee. And the reason we had the reason somebody would want an update when they paid a close fee is they're giving value, and they're saying, I want some value back. I want to know that you went to that address, and there's value in not knowing the car was there. And so I'm going to pay you for that. But then the only thing that really changed in the contract was no close fee. And I think it's one of those practices that had a very good intention early on, could still have some utility today, but it's one of those practices that everybody's just gotten so used to that they don't want to. I talked to a client once and said, what if we got rid of updates? They called all their managers in and said, what would happen if we got rid of updates? And it was like, I don't think it'd affect rates, but I don't know what all these people would do, that are looking at these updates. 43, what was the number that I can't remember what. We ended up calculating update cost at a per touch basis. And I think we were averaging 30 to 45 seconds. I think Justin helped on this, and Mike, you may have provided some data. But the cost to the industry was about $40 per recovery that is being spent in update energy either by the lender, by the forwarder, or by the agent. And $40 goes a long way, times 2 or 3 million repos. There's a lot of waste there, and it starts with the conversation.
So who still has a general expectation or requirement that their agents or their forwarders provide an update every 3 days or so? Just show of hands. Yeah. Still very much an issue out there. And if you think about it, we all know what the update is. Don't have the car. that is the update, really 100% of the time. So what we encourage our lenders to start thinking about is, especially if they're already scorecarding their vendors, they're rewarding good performance, they're penalizing poor performance. That's really all the motivation that we need to manage the business correctly. This update expectation, frankly, forces a lot of inefficiency onto the business. Either time spent running addresses that we know the car's not at because there's an expectation, or there's energy being spent inside the agency basically manufacturing an update. And this, that's the power of this geotagging technology. All that goes away, but the expectation as to what's a realistic run schedule has to change as well. And maybe that's a good question for you, Andy. As an agency, what is a realistic expectation? What should we really be able to expect, given the realities of the economics of running an agency? How often should we expect it?
So from the time that we get an assignment to the time that it closes, we'll probably give you a solid 3 good runs, and then maybe a 4th or a 5th run if you're super lucky or super awesome. But you're going to get 3 runs out of us. Now, to go back to the geo part, right? The problem with the updates is that there's always that one person, right? I'm just going to call her Karen. Karen just loves sending out emails, right? Hey, lunch guys, who wants lunch, or who wants to go out to dinner, who wants to do happy hour, right? You just always get emails from Karen. But then eventually you just stop caring about that email because you're like, oh yeah, Karen, she wants lunch, got it, yeah, okay, right? And then Bob sends you an email, and you're like, whoa, I never get an email from Bob. What's going on, right? Oh, that's the email you're going to click. It's the same theory with updates, right? Like you're getting all of this, hey, we don't have your car, we don't have your car, we don't have your car. Okay, well, why are you trying to consume it? So stop trying to consume it, and when you actually see an update, you should be like, hey, we have a problem, what's this update say? And then you dive in there and you start looking at it, right? The only updates that you care about are the problems, and that's what we got to get to.
So to touch on.
Needle in a haystack.
To touch on that a little bit, in fact, we started last week, and really, geo updates have been out since 2015. In fact, anything through the mobile applications has been geo verified since 2015. But the way you're consuming the data is still text, right? You guys, whether it's through API, whether you're logging into Cort system, whether you're logging into mine, you're consuming all this data via text. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to ease the industry into the process by creating an update type, so that instead of a text update, what you'll be receiving is kind of a categorized set of updates. So if it's a simple ran the address, no unit found, that's going to be an update type. And the next phase of that is also going to be your kind of discounted or your invalidated information, because a lot of agencies will tell you in an update that this address is no longer any good, but per your automated systems, you guys are still asking for an update on 123 Main Street, even though on the first day that agency told you this address is no good, it's vacant, and it was vacant the 3 times I ran this before from 3 other companies. So what we want to do is categorize those into buckets, if you will, or update types. So to Andy's point, the only thing you're going to be doing is actually filtering through either we found new information or we need new information. But the simple status updates, we think that those are a thing of the past, and we've kind of proven that by the numbers. So we're going to try to put those status updates in a bucket. So to Andy's point, you can kind of ignore those, and what you start doing is really honing in on the focus points of this needs more information or this has new information. Those are really the 2 things that you're going to capture in an update that have value.
Yeah. One thing I forgot, Mike, when we were having these discussions with lenders a year or 2 ago, lender that was using forwarders, using multiple agents, and multiple systems, data flowing through. And the real value that lender had in the update was just making sure the agent got the assignment. Just making sure that it actually got to the field. And the update was one way to know that, okay, someone got this assignment. But the lack of confidence that it went all the way through and made it through all the different systems and copies and pastes and integrations and APIs down to someone actually doing it. And when they said that, I was like, well, that makes sense. I can see why that's a validation point. And a lot of folks in here raised their hand, and I bet they have some good reasons that we're not fully appreciating on why they want updates. And I think it's probably a good chance to get some feedback from some of you folks, because there is value in them, and sometimes we don't see it from this perspective because we're not on your side of it from a lender perspective. But I'd love to hear if anybody's got any thoughts on it or things we can change.
I have one. Sometimes we assign things out, and you guys sometimes don't provide an update, right? And so there goes 3 days, and then my client.
Yeah.
It's a valid point. What we've seen a lot of lenders do to try to straddle the line, so to speak, is that they've changed their historical policy of I need to see an update every 2 or 3 days to I need to see the first update within a couple of days, maybe 3 days, and then after that they let their scorecard manage the rest of the process, because they want to know that it was run at least once, and but they don't obsess about it after that. And if the agent or the forwarder's not managing their business correctly, that there'll be a price that we pay for that. Craig.
Cort, even if it's a auto update through a mobile app, and we get that auto update a couple different times, it will trigger us possibly because we might have initially limited addresses, right? Knowing that you've run that.
When Cort and I spoke on this last year, we'd kind of finished going over what the technology can do, and then we sidebarred later, and Cort said, "I don't think these guys are ready for this yet," and that was kind of the takeaway from last year, or last couple times we'd spoke. But I think that the transition is I mean, for lack of a better term, you've got, I think there's some canned responses, but then they can be associated with a geo-verified attempt. But we also ran a study with IRS 2 years ago when we were looking to go to more of an automated update process. And we started looking at the FTE savings, or the number of addresses that an agency can hit in a particular day, which means that they can get back to your addresses more frequently. Just to give you an idea in the field of what the technology can do, when agents used to run simply off of RDN or simply off of MBSi and they were typing in an update, that process was cut by 3 minutes per transaction just with mobile technology because of voice to text. So we were watching the time spent at an address go down by 3 minutes per transaction, which means that these companies can get to more addresses and get back to your addresses quicker. But now, with kind of a more automated process, a simpler canned response, we can also cut that time down as well and still provide a value add back. So this is kind of that happy medium where instead of just simply going to a full-blown geo-stamp and stamp it and done and move on, I think we've got a good hybrid approach to help solve that and kind of ease the transition.
Craig, if you got a geo update, would that, you obviously assume they didn't get the car and they were there, so some number of those could automatically on your side trigger to go get another address, right?
Yeah, more so than, a bunch of texts saying, well, it's, in front of another car, or, there's 3 dogs guarding the car.
Right, yeah, those are significant, meaningful updates. That is, hey, there is something here that is gonna affect my impact to get this car. I'm not saying it's a bad address, but that's a real update, and I don't think anybody's talking about getting rid of those. But what happens is those get lost in the noise, right? Those get lost in all the fake updates. And one of the things, I think maybe it'll come up in another question, is how can we better use data? And I think, when you get to that, I think we can talk about some ways in which we can figure out best practices on some of this stuff.
Sure. Well, let's actually get to that. But I'll just close this topic out by just emphasizing this is a huge issue in the industry. You as lenders, you're trying to keep your costs down as low as possible. There is a ton of cost at the agent level and at the forwarder level chasing these updates. I mean, we have 150 or so admins or reps, and the better part of their job is trying to chase down updates when we know what the update is, and that is the car hasn't been recovered. But the better part of the job of 150 people in our organization is spent chasing this stuff down, which means that's less time they can spend on skip tracing and doing other things that actually could meaningfully contribute to recovering the car. So actually moving on to data, because at the end of the day, all this really comes down to data and the ability to consume it. I think somebody, maybe you, Justin, made the point that we really don't have the ability to consume it and to utilize it. Where do you think the biggest issues are, and what's the solution?
I would say that to echo Cort's point earlier on, what's your access points? How are you consuming it through is it through API? Are you doing it manually? Are you using a collection software? Are you using my software? Are you using Cort's? I think deciding which data elements you want, what's crucial, where's the value add, and then making sure that you're kind of demanding that of your software provider, right? So if that's an in-house proprietary system, I think you need to be ready to consume data in a different fashion, and you need to be ready to process it for your own decisioning and modeling. If you're using a collection software, if you're using, one of the 5 or 6 major collection softwares out there, I think you need to engage in those conversations and say, hey, we know that the major software players in the recovery industry are starting to gather this types of data. That needs to be accessible to me through my collections platform if that's where you want to operate out of. So I'd be demanding of your software providers for sure.
And you got to have really strong analytic support.
Absolutely.
That. To us, that's been the biggest challenge. We've had data, just tons of data, on our repossession efforts for years. Very granular, but only now we're starting to really harness that data and make decisions. And we'll have a session on this a little bit later, showing you a bit of a case study that decisions that you made looking at data from 10,000 feet look the decisions are completely different when you're able to look at data at the ground level. And that's where we see the biggest opportunity, is taking the data that we've long had access to, but actually more effectively utilizing it.
So guys, we're trying to figure, I think we're all trying to figure out each other, because what are your expectations of us? Because, you know, we kind of see you, we send over the assignment, it goes into a black box, and that's why we're asking for updates, because we have no idea what's going inside the box. And our plan is still be forced to.
I don't know, we started identifying when I first got in this space, trust. So when you ask what you could give someone, I would say trust. You're paying this guy, and I'm not a repo guy, so I'm not in that part of it, but you're ultimately paying someone only based on whether he gets the car or not, and presumably you're giving it to him because you trust him enough as a vendor to work hard. And you have to trust that he's trying, because he doesn't get paid either. He doesn't get a paycheck. And if he doesn't get the car, then there was a good reason, or he's a bad agent, and that'll show up in his recovery rate. And I would, one of the things that Jose was mentioning and asking about the challenges that lenders have. And what we have found is that the folks that are on the loss mid side of our biggest clients, they don't necessarily have availability of the best tech resources within the company. They put in a request for tech, and they go, yeah, 2024, we'll get right on that, line up. And so what we've taken the approach is, there are things that we can give you guys that you need, and there are things that we could give you that you can't consume. And then there are things that we could do for you and give you the ability to consume and act on it. The new platform that we have, we've built a really slick determination engine that allows you to take any data element we have, slice and dice it into a UI that creates schedules and rules. And what it allows you to do is experiment. I want to try 100 assignments here and 100 assignments here, and on these I'm going to require no updates, and on these I'm going to require updates. Or, I'm going to give these out for 3 days and these out for 30 days, and see where it gives you the ability to easily change your strategy, experiment, change one variable to try again. And ultimately, what I have seen is that the lender's side right now, they have so many technical challenges with compliance and everything else that getting the resource to kind of put these kind of tools in place on the lender side are just incredibly difficult. And so if we're going to move the needle, I think we have to start on it and let the lenders consume when they're ready. That's what I came away with over the last couple of years, is that the ability's there to make decisions based on the data. Joe Hearn is here, and he's on the remarketing side. You'll hear from him later. We've talked about this concept of tranching or bucketing, so not everything's being done the same way. And, most people have the same repo strategy and the same remarketing strategy they've had for 25 years. If it's in this zip code, I give it to this guy for this long, and then I switch and I do it again. That may be the best, but the chances that we got it right 25 years ago or 30 years ago, and it's still the best way to do it, are probably pretty slim.
Justin, Andy, you want to add anything?
Well, I don't think that the audience has been pretty clear that there's definitely a value add in the update from their perspective, right? It's just what's the type and what's absolutely necessary. If you guys need, if what you're needing, and we're not necessarily advocating for a one and done approach. Although I do agree with Cort, because I've sat on that side of the aisle as well. It is simple to say if you trust this guy and you're hiring and you've contracted him, trust that he'll do the right thing. Sitting on that side of the fence before, that's what the agencies would like you to do. But I can see the disconnect between what your collectors are incentivized to do, and that's why we feel like we've got a good hybrid approach that can kind of ease the process and kind of create those buckets just for the updates. So you guys will start seeing that. You'll start seeing that in the next 3 to 4 weeks, where these updates are going to come in as more of a type, so you can see what's an office update, what's a field update. And what is the update type, so that at least it can specify. To your point, I don't need to know that it's a brown house 3 times and that the car wasn't found, but I need some point of, hey, there's still activity here and it's verified activity, so that your collectors know how to move forward. So our takeaway was, we didn't think you guys were ready for just a one and done all in geo stamp that's really aggressive. We'd love to see it, because it'd save everybody a lot of FTE. But we think we found a middle ground where you can still grab the data that's pertinent to you, but we can let you filter the data out by what's most pertinent now. So that's our first step at easing you guys into kind of a newer approach rather than just text updates every single day.
And, you know, to your point, Chuck, there is a bit of a dilemma because the solution to some of these issues requires that the lenders take more of a sort of a portfolio management approach and perspective as opposed to sort of an individual account approach and perspective. And that's the way it's historically been done. It's how's the work been on this particular case as opposed to how's this vendor performing for me overall. And if you have the right process, the right rules for when you're going to rotate an assignment, the right rules for what you want to see in that first update, the right incentives and rewards and penalties for vendors that perform and don't perform, the rest sort of takes care of itself. Not necessarily at each individual account level, but in terms of getting the overall best performance on your portfolio from a vendor, I think you'll get there better through that approach than a focus on individual updates. Time flies. Where do you guys see this technology going from here? What can we expect to see new in mobile apps in the future, or any other aspect of your platforms?
Well, we can't give away all the secrets.
Anything that you can.
Hang on, give me a pen ready.
You are on video, by the way.
No, I think you're going to see cleaner data. We're already introducing you to real-time connectivity at the agent level. That's something that's, although it started in 2015, 2016, you're already getting connected much quicker to your assignments, right? Your assignments are hitting the field faster. Agents aren't coming back and updating their accounts at the end of the night anymore because they can't. They've got to be within a certain proximity of the address to perform an update. So the information you guys are getting is already better. You may not have realized because it still comes through the same conduit, whether it be Cort software or mine, but you're starting to get information quicker. Now our job is to make the information cleaner and more consumable. So I think, the next 2 to 3 years, even though our space has been really slow to move with technology forces more speed now on every industry. So I think you're going to see a lot of enhancements over the next 2 years out of both software companies.
There's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. Does that have a role in our industry? Or does that really just mean better mining of data?
Yeah, in my mind, I think that the term artificial intelligence is overused, misunderstood. Hell, I don't know if I understand it completely. But I will say that to the extent that we can use data to make decisions in real time that are not monolithic across the board, across the whole portfolio, but the ability to consume the data, use it to drive workflow and processes downstream, that might be as far as we can get in the near future. And I think that's a huge step forward. The platforms are 20 years old. They can only do so much the way they are right now. And the new platforms will be able to keep up with data changes and things that we don't even know are out there yet because they're architected differently. You can plug and play in new technologies that may be developed in a different industry. And I think more flexibility and capabilities of the systems will maybe not give us artificial intelligence, but it'll give us a heck of a lot better workflow.
Andy?
I think logic is the most important piece that's going to come out of all this here in the next year or so, right? So when you have a VIN, for those of you that work direct with agents and then you go to a forwarding model, you need to figure out what that story is tied to that particular VIN. So if you give it to the direct agent, you're going to wait 15, 20 days, maybe 30 days, and then you're going to send it to a forwarder. And that forwarder is going to send it back to that same agent. And then that same agent is going to run it your 3 times, and then he's going to get it back again through another forwarder, right? But you need to track that history. You're not going to say, oh, I'm just going to give it to the next guy. I'm going to give it to the next guy, because there isn't that next guy. So you need to be able to identify the story of your VINs to see where they're going, how they're being acted on.
That's tremendously valuable information to us and avoids a lot of wasted time and effort. But many lenders, they have it, but they They don't want to share it because they don't want to somehow bias the agent's efforts, but in reality, it makes the agent's effort, that information will make their efforts more intelligent, more productive. So just to comment to wrap things up, obviously this is a critical area. This is really interesting stuff, but just to emphasize again, to harness this, we're going to have to work together. Lenders are going to have to change their sort of historical view of some of these issues. We're going to have to change sort of what we expect and how we manage agencies and agents. Otherwise, I mean, we'll make progress by adopting this technology, but we'll leave a lot on the table. Any final questions anybody has? Yes, sir.
One for you guys. We see that there's a lot of lien holders using scorecards to see what's going on right now.
That was teed up perfectly for you.
Yeah, it was.
I know. Yes. Yes, every month we send out scorecards to all of our forwarders, right? We talk about DTR rate, days to recovery, success rate, revenue per assignment, right? And then days to pay, right? Because that's its own problem is days to pay and getting paid, and everyone's different, and we have to have a conversation about, we got to float 30, 50, sometimes 60 days before we get paid for recovery. So that's important for us to say, hey, look, your competitors are paying us in like 20 days. You guys are taking us 50-some days. But yes, we are actively scorecarding them. We let them know what their metrics are. Sometimes when we say, hey, our success rate for this particular lien holder is at 60%, we're killing it. Can you get us more of this? I can't be that. No. And then you never hear back from them, right? Or you come back and you say, hey, this particular client, we're doing like 30%. What's going on? No, that's not right, right? We do way better than that. Okay, tell me. These are the VINs I have. This is my bucket. What's going on here? And then you get to have that conversation. So yeah, we absolutely have that conversation.
I would say there's not a lot of statting on it right now, but I would say that the agent network is being very mindful as well of what's your post-recovery process. If you've got a really detailed or a really cumbersome post-recovery process, maybe you've cut ancillary fees in some way, shape, or form. That's going into a lot of the agents' decisioning on prioritization of accounts, all the way to the back end, because in some cases, it's really expensive for these companies to process all the way to the back end of the assignment. So they might pick up your car and lose money too. So, yeah.
We're actually going to cover some of this in one of the later sessions on the agent panel. Okay, guys, thanks a lot. It was great. Appreciate it.